The morning light filtered through the crystalline walls of the Galactic Integration Academy as beings from dozens of worlds made their way through its ancient corridors. The Academy had stood on Station 7 for nearly 800 years, educating the children of civilizations that had mastered faster than light travel, while humanity was still learning to make fire. Its reputation was legendary. Its standards were unforgiving. And until this particular morning, no human had ever been permitted to walk through its doors. Lucy stood at the entrance gate with her single bag slung over her shoulder and her student documentation clutched in her hand. She was 16 years old with dark hair that she kept tied back in a simple ponytail and brown eyes that had learned to stay steady even when everything inside her was shaking. Her father had been a Marine before becoming a diplomat, and he had taught her one thing above all others: never let them see you flinch. The security officer at the gate was a tall creature with silver skin and three eyes arranged in a triangle on its elongated face. It looked at Lucy's documentation, then looked at Lucy, then looked at the documentation again as if hoping the words might change. Human, it said, and the word came through her translator with a tone of disbelief. You are the human exchange student. Yes, Lucy said. Lucy, I'm expected. The made a sound that her translator could not interpret. It handed back her documentation and pressed a button that opened the inner gate. Classroom 47C instructor, do try not to cause any incidents. Lucy walked through the gate without responding. She had heard worse. She would hear worse still. This was the price of being first, and she had volunteered for it with her eyes wide open. The corridors of the academy were designed to accommodate species of wildly different sizes and environmental needs. Some sections had higher gravity. Others had different atmospheric compositions contained behind transparent barriers. Lucy walked through the standard oxygen section, passing students who stopped their conversations to stare at her as she went by. She heard the whispers, predator species, dangerous, primitive. She kept walking. Classroom 47C was located on the fourth level of the main academic building. Lucy arrived exactly 3 minutes before the scheduled start time, which she had calculated as the optimal window. Too early, and she would have to endure extended starring. Too late, and she would draw even more attention. 3 minutes was just enough time to find a seat and become part of the furniture before anything official began. She pressed the entry panel and the door slid open. The classroom was arranged in a semicircle with tiered seating that descended toward a central teaching platform. Approximately 40 students were already present, representing at least 15 different species that Lucy could identify and several that she could not. They all turned to look at her. The silence was immediate and complete. Lucy walked down the central aisle toward the back of the room, where several empty seats remained. She chose one in the corner, sat down, and pulled out her tablet. She did not look up. She did not acknowledge the stares. She simply began reviewing the course materials as if she were completely alone. The whispers started almost immediately. Lucy's translator picked up fragments of conversation from the students nearest to her. Is that really a human? I thought they would be bigger. My uncle said humans are giant predators. Look at its eyes, forward-facing, definitely a hunter species. I heard they can run for hours without stopping. They chase their prey until it collapses from exhaustion. Should we move? Is it safe to sit this close? Lucy continued reading. The course was called Foundations of Relations, and the first chapter covered the historical formation of the Galactic Compact. She had already read it twice on the transport ship, but reviewing it gave her something to focus on besides the fear and hostility radiating from every direction. The door at the front of the classroom opened, and an instructor entered. He was a Meridian, a species that Lucy had studied extensively before her arrival. Meridians were considered one of the most intellectually accomplished species in the compact. They had pale blue skin, 4 antennae that extended from their foreheads and moved to express emotion, and a reputation for absolute confidence in their own superiority. Instructor's antennae were currently held high and slightly forward, indicating satisfaction and authority. He walked to the central platform and activated the holographic display system with a casual gesture. "Good morning, students," he said. "I trust you all completed the preliminary readings. Today, we will be discussing the fundamental principles that separate civilized species from those still struggling to reach that designation." His eyes swept the room and stopped on Lucy. His antennae flattened against his skull. "Ah," he said, "I see our special guest has arrived. Class, this is the human exchange student. She will be observing our sessions as part of a cultural outreach program designed to help primitive species understand civilized society." Lucy looked up from her tablet. "My name is Lucy," she said calmly. "I am not observing. I am enrolled as a full student with complete course credit eligibility." The silence that followed was even heavier than before. Students exchanged glances. A few made sounds of surprise or alarm. Instructor's antennae twitched. "I see. Well then, miss, I hope you will be able to keep up. Our curriculum is designed for species with fully developed cognitive capabilities. You may find it challenging." "I will do my best," Lucy said. "I am certain you will. Now then, let us begin with a fundamental question. Can anyone tell me what distinguishes a category, one civilization, from lower categories?" A student in the front row raised a tentacle. "Category 1 civilizations have achieved stable planetary governance, sustainable resource management, and peaceful integration with the galactic community for a minimum of 1,000 standard years." "Excellent. And what characteristics typically prevent a species from achieving Category 1 status?" They glanced back at Lucy before answering. "Aggressive territorial behavior, resource hoarding instincts, and evolutionary development on high-threat worlds." "Precisely." Instructor's antennae rose with obvious pleasure. "Species that evolve on face such constant survival pressure that their neural development prioritizes short-term threat response over long-term cooperative thinking. This is not a judgment. It is simply biology. Such species cannot help being what they are." He looked directly at Lucy. "Humans, for example, evolved on a world with extreme temperature variations, active tectonic plates, severe weather patterns, and an abundance of predator species. Their brains developed accordingly. They are excellent at immediate threat assessment and short-term problem solving, but they struggle with the kind of extended cooperative planning that defines truly advanced civilizations." Lucy's hand rose slowly. Instructor's antennae flattened again. "Yes, miss." "I was just wondering," Lucy said, her voice perfectly steady, "how you define cooperative planning, because humans have constructed projects that took multiple generations to complete. We have maintained cultural institutions for thousands of years. We have worked together in groups ranging from 2 individuals to billions. Is that not cooperative planning?" The classroom was utterly silent. No one moved, no one breathed. Instructor smiled. It was not a kind expression. "How delightful," he said. "A human who wishes to debate. Very well, miss. Let us examine your species' record of cooperation more closely." Instructor walked slowly around the central platform. His 4 antennae now held in a position that Lucy's cultural training identified as aggressive confidence. He was enjoying this. She could see it in the way he moved, in the careful theatrical timing of his gestures, in the slight smile that played at the corners of his thin mouth. "Let us examine humanity's record of cooperation," he said, activating the holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the platform. Maps of Earth showing territorial divisions. Graphs displaying military conflicts throughout human history. Video footage of wars, riots, and destruction. "In the 3,000 years before your species achieved," Instructor continued, "humans engaged in approximately 14,700 recorded armed conflicts, not minor disputes. Full-scale wars involving the deliberate killing of your own kind. Can anyone in this room name a species that has matched that record? No one responded. The students were watching Lucy now, waiting to see how she would react to this public humiliation. Lucy kept her expression neutral. She had known this was coming. Every human who ventured into galactic society faced the same litany of accusations, the same cherry-picked statistics, the same fundamental misunderstanding of what humanity actually was. Furthermore, instructor said, humans have demonstrated a consistent pattern of environmental destruction. You poisoned your own atmosphere. You contaminated your own water supplies. You drove thousands of other species on your planet to extinction. Even after achieving, your first major cooperative project was a space station that you used primarily for military surveillance. He turned off the display and faced the class directly. This is what survival priority psychology produces. A species so focused on immediate competitive advantage that they cannot stop harming themselves and others even when they know the consequences. Humans are not evil. They are simply limited by their evolutionary heritage. A student near the middle of the room raised a manipulator appendage. It was a species that resembled a large insect with metallic blue plating. Instructor, are humans truly dangerous? Should we be concerned about having one in our classroom? Instructor glanced at Lucy with an expression of exaggerated thoughtfulness. An excellent question. Humans are certainly capable of violence. Their physical bodies are remarkably durable by galactic standards. They can survive injuries that would kill most species. They can function in temperature ranges that would incapacitate others. They have a documented ability to suppress pain responses and continue fighting long after any rational being would have surrendered. He paused for effect. However, I do not believe Miss poses any immediate threat. Humans are also highly social creatures with strong inhibitions against harming members of their perceived group. As long as she considers us part of her social circle, we should be perfectly safe. Several students laughed. The sound was cruel and knowing. Lucy continued to sit quietly, her hands folded on her desk, her eyes fixed on instructor. She had promised herself she would not react. She had promised her father she would represent humanity with dignity regardless of what she faced. But something was building inside her. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something patient. Now then, instructor said, let us return to our primary topic. The psychological limitations of species explain why humanity has been granted only provisional observer status in the Galactic Compact. Full membership requires demonstrated capacity for stable, long-term cooperation. Humanity has not yet proven this capacity. How long have we had to prove it? Lucy asked. Instructor Santini twitched with irritation. I beg your pardon. Humanity has had contact with the Galactic Compact for 37 years, Lucy said. In that time, we have not engaged in a single armed conflict with any other species. We have honored every treaty we have signed. We have provided humanitarian aid to 4 different worlds that experienced natural disasters. We have shared medical research that helped cure diseases affecting 3 compact species. How long must we demonstrate peaceful cooperation before it counts? The classroom had gone very still. Instructor's antennae flattened completely against his skull. Those examples are meaningless in the larger context, he said. 37 years is nothing. The consortium demonstrated stable cooperation for 6,000 years before being granted full membership. The Meridian people proved themselves over 8,000 years. You cannot expect us to judge humanity by a different standard simply because you are impatient. I'm not asking for a different standard, Lucy said. I'm asking for the same standard. The fought 17 inter-clan wars in their first century of recorded history. The Meridians had a civil conflict that lasted 400 years and killed approximately 12% of their population. Every species in this room has a history of violence. Why is humanity judged solely by its past while other species are judged by their present? The silence that followed was absolute. Lucy could feel the tension in the room like a physical pressure against her skin. Instructor recovered quickly. His antennae rose to a position of dismissive superiority. You make an interesting rhetorical point, miss. However, you are comparing situations that are not truly comparable. The conflicts you mention occurred in the distant past of those civilizations. They have since evolved beyond such primitive behavior. Humanity's conflicts occurred within living memory. Your species is still in its violent phase. Some humans alive today remember a time before we had electricity, Lucy said quietly. Our entire technological civilization is less than 300 years old. We went from first powered flight to landing on our moon in 66 years. We went from our first computer to artificial intelligence in less than a century. When you judge us by the standards of species that had thousands of years to develop, you are not making a fair comparison. You are setting us up to fail. A murmur ran through the classroom. Some students were looking at Lucy with something that might have been curiosity rather than fear. Instructor's expression hardened. I think we have spent enough time on this tangent. Miss, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is not a debate forum. This is a classroom where students come to learn established facts about relations. Your personal opinions, however passionately held, do not change the fundamental realities of what humanity is. And what is humanity? Lucy asked. In your expert opinion. Humanity is a young, aggressive, emotionally driven species with tremendous potential but severe limitations, instructor said. You are capable of remarkable individual achievements, but your societies are unstable, and your judgment is compromised by chemical processes in your primitive brains that you call feelings. You cannot be trusted with full membership in the compact because you cannot be trusted to control yourselves. He smiled again, that thin, cold expression that contained no warmth at all. But do not despair, miss. Perhaps in a few thousand years, your descendants will have evolved past these limitations. Until then, we are here to help you understand civilized society, even if you cannot yet fully participate in it. Lucy looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, lowered her eyes to her tablet and began taking notes. Instructor seemed satisfied by her apparent surrender. He returned to his lecture, moving on to discuss the economic frameworks that govern trade between compact members. His voice droned on, filling the room with facts and figures that the other students dutifully recorded. But Lucy was not taking notes on the lecture. She was writing something else entirely. A list. A careful, methodical list of every insult, every dismissal, every condescending assumption that instructor had made about her species. Not because she planned revenge. That was not the human way, no matter what the instructor believed. She was making the list because she wanted to remember this moment. She wanted to remember exactly how it felt to be judged by people who did not know her, who had never tried to know her, who had decided what she was before she ever walked through the door. She wanted to remember, so that she would never do the same thing to anyone else. The lecture continued for another 40 minutes. Instructor discussed trade agreements and resource allocation protocols, and the complex bureaucratic structures that governed interactions between compact members. He occasionally glanced at Lucy as if expecting her to interrupt again, but she remained silent, her attention fixed on her tablet, her expression revealing nothing. The other students had relaxed somewhat. The initial shock of having a human in their midst had faded into something like cautious acceptance. A few of them even stopped flinching when Lucy shifted in her seat or reached for her water bottle. Progress, Lucy thought. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Instructor was in the middle of explaining the dispute resolution mechanisms between major trading partners when the first alarm sounded. It was a low tone at first, almost gentle, rising and falling in a pattern that Lucy did not recognize. Around her, students paused in their note-taking. Several antennae, tentacles, and sensory appendages rose in obvious confusion. That is unusual, instructor said, his own antennae twitching with uncertainty. That alarm indicates a potential environmental hazard in a nearby sector. I am certain it is nothing serious. The second alarm was much louder. The tone shifted to something higher and more urgent, and red lights began flashing along the edges of the ceiling. Now the students began to panic. The named wrapped all 6 tentacles around the desk in front of them, producing a high-pitched keening sound that Lucy's translator could not interpret. The student named began clicking its mandibles rapidly, and several of the other students followed suit. A group of small, furry beings in the front row huddled together and started emitting a chemical smell that made Lucy's eyes water. "Remain calm," instructor said, but his own voice had risen in pitch, and his antennae were pressed flat against his skull in obvious fear. "I will contact the administration. Everyone stay in your seats." He moved to the communication panel on the wall and pressed several buttons. Nothing happened. He pressed them again, harder this time, and the panel flickered briefly before going dark. "The communication system is not responding," he said, and now there was genuine alarm in his voice. "This should not be possible. The backup system should have engaged automatically." The classroom door burst open, and a station administrator rushed in. She was a species with pale skin and large dark eyes that currently showed obvious terror. Her uniform was disheveled, and there was a small cut on her forehead that was leaking a substance that might have been blood. "Instructor," she gasped, "there has been a hull breach. Sector 12. The emergency bulkheads have sealed, but the atmospheric recycling system was damaged. Air pressure is dropping throughout this section of the station." "How long do we have?" instructor asked. "Perhaps 20 minutes before the pressure drops below safe levels for most species. The evacuation routes are being cleared, but there is a problem." The administrator paused, her large eyes darting around the room. "The primary route is completely blocked by debris from a secondary explosion. The backup route passes through a section that has already lost significant atmosphere. Most species cannot survive the journey." A sound rose from the students, not quite screaming but close to it. The chemical smell from the furry beings intensified. Several students began moving toward the door, pushing and shoving in their desperation to escape. "Everyone stop," instructor commanded. His voice cracked on the last word. "We must remain calm. Panic will only make things worse." "What are we supposed to do?" wailed. "If we cannot evacuate, we will die here." "The rescue teams are working on clearing the primary route," the administrator said. "But it will take time, at least 30 minutes, perhaps more. I do not know if we have that long." Lucy had been sitting quietly through all of this, watching the chaos unfold around her. Now she stood up slowly and walked down the aisle toward the administrator. Students pressed back against their seats as she passed, their fear of the human temporarily overriding their panic about the station emergency. "What exactly is blocking the backup route?" Lucy asked. The administrator stared at her. "You are the human." "Yes, what is blocking the route?" "Structural debris. Several large pieces of composite material from the damaged bulkhead. Our emergency response equipment cannot move them, and we do not have time to cut through." "How large are the pieces?" The administrator blinked. "The largest is approximately 2 meters by 1 meter. It weighs perhaps 300 kilograms. Why are you asking these questions?" Lucy nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "And the atmospheric conditions in the damaged section?" "Approximately 40% of normal oxygen levels and dropping. Temperature has fallen to near freezing. No species in this classroom could survive more than a few minutes in those conditions." The administrator paused. "Why do you want to know this?" Lucy turned and walked back to her seat. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small device that she fitted over her mouth and nose. It was a compact emergency respirator, standard equipment for humans traveling in space. Her father had given it to her before she left Earth. "Keep everyone calm," she said. I will be back." She walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard instructor's voice, sharp with disbelief. "Where do you think you are going? You cannot possibly be thinking of going out there. You will die." Lucy paused at the doorway and looked back at him. "I am thinking of going out there because someone needs to, and I will not die. I am from a, remember, we are built for environments like this." "That is not how it works," instructor sputtered. "Your evolutionary advantages are for your specific world. You cannot simply adapt to any dangerous environment." "Watch me," Lucy said. She stepped through the door and began running toward the damaged section. The corridor outside the classroom was already noticeably colder than before. Emergency lighting cast everything in a harsh red glow that made shadows seem deeper and more threatening. Lucy could hear alarms echoing from multiple directions, overlapping into a continuous wail of electronic distress. She ran faster. The atmospheric pressure was dropping. She could feel it in her ears, a growing discomfort that her body registered as wrongness. Her respirator was providing oxygen, but the pressure differential was something she would simply have to endure. "This is what we are," she thought as she ran. "This is what evolution made us. Not conquerors, not predators, survivors." She reached the entrance to the damaged section and stopped. The bulkhead door was partially open, jammed by a piece of twisted metal. Beyond it, she could see the debris field that the administrator had described. Large chunks of composite material scattered across the corridor, blocking any passage. The air beyond the door was thin and cold. Frost was already forming on the metal surfaces. Lucy took a deep breath from her respirator and stepped through. Her skin immediately registered the temperature drop. Her body began diverting blood from her extremities to protect her core organs. Her heart rate increased to pump more oxygen to her muscles. All of this happened automatically, without conscious thought. Millions of years of evolution preparing her for exactly this moment. For the cold, for the thin air, for the challenge that no civilized species would ever face willingly. Lucy set her feet, grabbed the nearest piece of debris, and began to pull. The debris was heavier than she expected. The first piece she grabbed was a section of wall paneling that had been torn free by the explosion, and it weighed at least 50 kilograms. Lucy braced herself, tightened her grip, and dragged it to the side of the corridor. Her fingers were already going numb from the cold. The metal she was touching was well below freezing, and even her human resilience had limits. She would have perhaps 15 minutes of useful hand function before the cold became a serious problem. 15 minutes, she would have to work fast. The second piece was larger, part of a support beam, twisted and broken, blocking most of the corridor width. Lucy examined it quickly, found a leverage point, and threw her weight against it. The beam shifted slightly but did not move enough to clear the path. She adjusted her position, planted her feet more firmly, and pushed again. This time she added a twist at the end, using her body weight and momentum together. The beam groaned, scraped against the floor, and finally slid far enough to create a gap. Not enough. The gap was perhaps half a meter wide. The administrator had said they needed to evacuate dozens of students. Many of those students were larger than Lucy. She needed to make the path wider. She moved to the next piece of debris, and the next, and the next. Time became meaningless. There was only the work: grab, lift, pull, push. Each piece of wreckage that she moved revealed another piece behind it. Each cleared meter of corridor showed her how much further she still had to go. Her muscles began to burn. Her lungs ached despite the respirator. The cold was seeping into her bones now, making her movements slower and less precise. But she kept going. This was what humans did. This was what our ancestors had done when they walked out of Africa into frozen landscapes. This was what explorers had done when they crossed oceans and climbed mountains and ventured into places that should have killed them. Humans did not stop when things became difficult. They did not stop when their bodies screamed at them to rest. They kept going until the job was done or until they could not go anymore. Lucy was not going to stop. She found the largest piece of debris about halfway through the damaged section. It was exactly as the administrator had described. A massive chunk of composite material, nearly 2 meters long and 1 meter wide, wedged diagonally across the corridor. There was no way around it. It had to move. Lucy stood before it and took several deep breaths from her respirator. Her hands were shaking now, partly from cold and partly from exhaustion. She had been working for almost 8 minutes. She was running out of time. She found the best grip she could manage on the rough surface of the composite. She bent her knees, positioned her back correctly, and prepared to lift. The first attempt failed. The material was simply too heavy, wedged too tightly. Lucy staggered back, gasping, her vision blurring slightly at the edges. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe Instructor was right. Maybe she was just a primitive creature from a violent world, too limited to make any real difference. Maybe she should go back, tell them she failed, and wait to die with the rest of them. No. Lucy shook her head, clearing away the doubt. She thought about her father, who had taught her that strength was not about being bigger or faster than everyone else. Strength was about refusing to quit. Strength was about finding a way when there was no way. She thought about the students in that classroom, the ones who had laughed at her, the ones who had called her primitive and dangerous. They were terrified right now. They were facing death, and there was nothing they could do about it. But Lucy could do something. She was the only one who could. She approached the debris again. This time she did not try to lift it straight up. Instead, she studied the angles, the way it was wedged, the points where it was catching on the walls and floor. She found a spot near the bottom where there was a small gap, perhaps just enough to get her fingers under. She knelt down, ignoring the ice-cold floor against her knees. She worked her fingers into the gap, feeling the sharp edges of the composite cutting into her skin. She did not care. Blood would wash off. Failure would not. She began to push from below, using her legs instead of her back. The strongest muscles in the human body, capable of moving weight that would stagger most other species. She pushed and felt the debris begin to shift. Not lift, shift. That was all she needed, not to pick it up, just to change its angle to break the wedge that was holding it in place. The composite groaned. Lucy screamed with the effort, a sound that echoed down the empty corridor. She pushed harder, putting everything she had into this single moment. The debris moved. It did not go far, perhaps 20 centimeters, but that was enough to break the wedge. Now it was just heavy, not stuck, heavy she could deal with. Lucy repositioned herself and began dragging the massive piece toward the wall, centimeter by centimeter. Her arms felt like they were on fire. Her back was spasming. Her fingers were bleeding where the sharp edges had cut through her skin. She kept pulling. After what felt like hours but was probably less than 2 minutes, the debris was against the wall. The corridor was clear. Not perfectly clear, but clear enough for people to pass through. Lucy stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, looking at what she had accomplished. Then she turned and began making her way back through the path she had created. The return journey was harder than the outward trip. Her body had used up most of its reserves. The cold had penetrated deep into her muscles, making every movement stiff and painful. She stumbled twice, catching herself on the walls that were now coated with frost. But she kept moving. She reached the bulkhead door and stepped through into the warmer air of the main corridor. It felt like stepping into a furnace after the freezing temperatures of the damaged section. Her body began shivering violently as it tried to restore normal function. She made her way back to classroom 47C when she opened the door. Every face turned toward her. She must have looked terrible. Her hands were bloody. Her clothes were covered in dust and ice crystals. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand. But she was alive, and she had done what she set out to do. "The path is clear," she said. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "We need to go now. The conditions are survivable if we move quickly." No one moved. They all just stared at her as if she were some kind of apparition, some impossible creature that had wandered in from a nightmare. It was who broke the silence. The student unwrapped their tentacles from the desk and stood up slowly. "She cleared the path," said. "The human cleared the path. We can escape." The spell broke. Students began moving toward the door, following Lucy and the administrator toward the evacuation route. Instructor remained frozen at the front of the room, his antennae flat against his skull, his expression unreadable. "Come on," Lucy said to him. "We need to go." He looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded once and followed. The evacuation was chaotic but successful. Lucy led the group through the damaged section, pointing out the safest path through the debris she had cleared. Several students struggled with the cold and thin air, but they helped each other, supporting those who faltered, encouraging those who hesitated. Lucy watched them work together and felt something warm in her chest despite the freezing temperatures around her. This was cooperation. This was what it looked like when survival stopped being a competition and became a shared goal. Instructor had said humans did not understand this, but he was wrong. Humans understood it better than anyone. They understood it because they had learned it the hard way, through countless generations of helping each other survive on a world that never stopped trying to kill them. They reached the safe zone with 4 minutes to spare. Emergency response teams were waiting with medical equipment and thermal blankets. The students were quickly sorted into groups based on species and medical needs. Several were taken away for treatment of mild hypothermia and respiratory distress. Lucy sat on a bench near the wall, a thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a medical officer treating the cuts on her hands. She was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Her whole body felt like it had been beaten with hammers and then frozen solid. But she was alive. They were all alive. Approached her slowly, their 6 tentacles moving in patterns that Lucy's cultural training identified as uncertainty and gratitude mixed together. "I want to thank you," said. "You saved us, all of us. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Lucy said quietly. "No, you did not understand. We were cruel to you. We laughed when instructor said those things about your species. We treated you like a dangerous animal instead of a person. You had every reason to let us face the consequences of our own prejudice." Lucy looked up at the student. "That is not how it works," she said. "You do not help people because they deserve it. You help them because they need it. That is what humans believe. That is what my father taught me." Was silent for a long moment. Then they extended one tentacle and touched Lucy's shoulder gently. "I think perhaps we have much to learn about your species." "Maybe we have things to learn about each other," Lucy said. The medical officer finished bandaging her hands and moved on to other patients. Lucy remained on the bench, watching the organized chaos of the evacuation response. She was too tired to move, too tired to think about anything beyond the simple fact of being alive. She did not notice instructor approaching until he was standing directly in front of her. He looked different somehow. His antennae were held in a position Lucy had never seen before, neither flat with fear nor raised with confidence. They were slightly tilted, almost hesitant, as if he was unsure of something for the first time in a very long time. "Miss," he said. "Instructor." He was quiet for several seconds. Lucy waited. "What you did," he finally said. "Going into that section, moving that debris, no Meridian could have done that. No species I know of could have survived those conditions long enough to clear that path." "Humans are tougher than we look," Lucy said. "Apparently so." He paused again, his antennae twitching slightly. "In my lecture, I said that humans were incapable of true cooperation. I said you were limited by your evolutionary heritage. I said you could not be trusted." I remember. I was wrong. The words hung in the air between them. Lucy had not expected them. She had not expected anything from instructor except perhaps more condescension, more dismissal, more of the same treatment she had received since walking through the door. You risked your life for beings who had mocked you, instructor continued. You suffered physical injury and exhaustion to save people who treated you as less than themselves. That is not the behavior of a primitive, aggressive species. That is something else entirely. That is just what humans do, Lucy said. We help. It is what we have always done. Not perfectly, not always. But when it matters, when people are in danger and we can make a difference, we help. That is who we are. Instructor inclined his head in a gesture that Lucy recognized as deep respect. I have taught relations for 40 years. I believed I understood the fundamental nature of different civilizations. Today, you have shown me that understanding is not the same as wisdom. I knew facts about humanity. I did not know humanity. Maybe you could get to know us better, Lucy said, if you were willing to try. Perhaps I could. He straightened slightly. Tomorrow, when we resume classes, I would like to revise my curriculum. I believe there are perspectives on cooperation that I have been neglecting. Would you be willing to share your insights with the class? Lucy smiled. It hurt her face, which was still stiff from the cold, but she smiled anyway. I would like that. Instructor nodded once more and walked away. Lucy watched him go, feeling something shift inside her. Not triumph, not vindication, something gentler than that. Understanding, maybe, or hope. The next day, Lucy returned to classroom 47C this time. When she walked through the door, no one pressed back in their seats. No one whispered about and predator species. Had saved a seat for her in the second row, right in the middle of the other students. Instructor began his lecture differently than before. He stood at the central platform and looked out at his students, his antennae held in that new, uncertain position that Lucy was beginning to recognize as openness. Yesterday, he said, we experienced an emergency that taught us something important. We learned that our assumptions about other species can blind us to their true nature. We learned that courage and compassion can come from unexpected places. And we learned that a young human woman, whom I personally treated with disrespect and condescension, responded not with anger but with heroism. He looked at Lucy, she looked back at him. I have been teaching that species are fundamentally limited by their evolutionary heritage, he continued. I am no longer certain that is true. Perhaps the challenges that shaped humanity did not make them aggressive and untrustworthy. Perhaps those challenges made them something else, something stronger, something we do not yet have words for. He turned to the holographic display and activated it. New images appeared. Images of humans helping each other after natural disasters. Images of human doctors treating patients from other species. Images of human diplomats working to resolve conflicts peacefully. Today we begin a new unit, instructor said. We will study humanity not as a case study of evolutionary limitation, but as a civilization that may have something to teach us all. Lucy sat in her seat and listened. Around her, students from a dozen worlds leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Outside the viewport, stars burned in the eternal darkness of space. And somewhere in the void between worlds, in the small, fragile stations where different species came together to learn from each other, a new understanding was beginning to grow. It would take time. It would take patience. It would take more acts of courage and kindness from humans who refused to become what others expected them to be. But it had started. In one classroom on one station, with one girl who proved that humanity was not defined by its history of violence, but by its capacity for something greater. The galaxy was watching now, and Lucy intended to show them exactly what humans could be.